Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today I want to share with you a review of the books and materials we use for our Alaska main lesson block, which included the Arctic Circle. And originally I put this together with a certain amount of books, and as we progressed with our unit, I actually pulled a lot of books that I already had in my homeschool library to add to this unit. And then I ended up buying 2 more. So what I want to do is share with you, first off, the books that you did not see in how we put together this unit so that you can see them and hear my thoughts on these books and why I added them in, as well as a couple of the other materials that we only just purchased at the end of this unit. So we'll be doing a couple of activities and books after this unit is done as we're into our other units. And this is not unusual for our unit studies and main lesson blocks. We often finish and complete a unit with some work that's still left over, but we do move on to other things. All right, so I also didn't plan to do any projects for this unit. I only just had a big stack of books. We allotted a week of time to do this unit, and for the books that we had and even the projects that we ended up adding to our unit, we were able to get it done in a week, and then I ended up adding some more books towards the middle end part of that week, so it did spill over into the following week. So just so you have an idea of how long this took, when you see all of these materials, I think you could get through all of these materials in about 1 to 2 weeks if this was your main focus. But just bear in mind that we were just doing this in addition to some daily math and some daily writing, but we just focused completely on these projects and these books. So let me start with the things that we ended up adding to this unit. Once the unit was underway, I realized that, number one, it was kind of shy on some of the flora and fauna of the area, and it was completely devoid of anything historical. And so as we were working through the unit, I felt like it needed a little bit more of those elements to make this feel a little bit more like a unit, even though this was just kind of a momentary inspiration for putting this unit together because my sister had recently moved up there to Alaska. And so when I looked at my own bookshelves, I found a lot of books that would help remedy the fact that we didn't have a lot of books on the animals and the plants of the area. And then once we pulled out a project, which I'll share with you in a little bit, on the gold rush and like panning for gold, I realized, it would be really great if we just had a couple of books on the gold rush in Alaska, and that way I would feel a little bit more complete about this unit. So you can find all of these additional books on the blog post that accompanies this video, where you can find all of the other projects that we ended up including in this unit. And one other thing is that I've put together a lesson plan so that you can, if you want, see how we divided up all of our books. And what's unique about this lesson plan, and what is something that ends up happening a lot in our homeschool, because we homeschool multiple grades, multiple ages, multiple abilities and interests, is that the lesson plan is divided up into grades or grade levels, or age levels is probably a little bit better way to look at it. So that of the books that you see today, some of them are really, really great for really young students and don't appeal so much for older students. And then I also have some books here that are really great for older students and not so much for younger students. Even they don't work so well even as read alouds. So I've divided up the lesson plan to share with you books that I think are appropriate for each of these levels. And by appropriate, I just mean that I think that the children will enjoy it. I think picture books are appropriate for every level, but there are some picture books that were definitely written for really, really young children. I'm going to show them to you and tell you that even when I have young children, I really don't care for those kinds of picture books, but the illustrations were just gorgeous, and that's why we have them. Okay, so let's dive in to the books that I want to share with you that we did not include in how we put together this unit. So the first book is by Jean Craighead George, and this is Look to the North, a Wolf Pup Diary. Now, we really like the book, and we really like the books from Jean Craighead George. She has written one of our favorite books, My Side of the Mountain, and I like this book almost equally as well. And then we also ended up including Icewell into it, which is Ice Whale, sorry, which is also written by her. So Look to the North. This is a Wolf Pup diary, and this is a fabulous book. So first, I actually want to share with you that when I am lesson planning, I usually have my little Post-it, full back sticky Post-its and a pencil. And I use these in order to help with the lesson plan. And more recently, I also use it to write about how we enjoyed the book. So I'll have these on the back of our books, not all of them, because sometimes we were just reading them so quickly I didn't get a chance to write on the back, which is kind of disappointing because very quickly I'll forget how much we enjoyed a book or what we thought about it. Sometimes I'll include what the children thought about it because sometimes I'll really love a book and the children don't care for it. And I'll also use it to lesson plan. Now, in general, for all of these books that you see here, they're all books that I read aloud to my children. But if I'm trying to figure out which days I'm going to read which books aloud, then I might include that on the back of the Post-it sticky on the back of the book so that, or on the front of the Post-it on the back of the book, so that I can write that I intend to do this like on a Monday or the actual date, or that it's going to be a read aloud, or that I'm going to assign it to my students, which generally I don't assign reading to my students. I almost always read it aloud. And then afterwards, you can write a little bit a note about the book, whether you liked it, whether the children liked it, or your thoughts on it. And that way you can kind of keep these books in, if you own them. Otherwise, you can just take your little stickies and put them into a notebook if you have borrowed your books from the library. And that way, the next time you do this unit, or if you're sharing with others, then you can say, oh, definitely, I would do these 3 books again, but I would probably pass on those other ones. So it's just a way to help lesson plan and also to help remember how you like the books, because as you'll be able to quickly tell, we go through a lot of books. Okay, so Look to the North. This is a really beautifully illustrated storybook, picture book, and I love beautifully illustrated picture books, even though I have to say that a lot of times my children aren't sitting next to me enjoying the illustrations. Usually I get to enjoy the illustrations. They are, I would say maybe half the time they are playing or they're engaged in some other activity where they're not just sitting and looking at the pictures. And that's completely fine. In fact, I think I prefer that because it allows those images to be created in their own mind rather than looking at the images on the page. I just really love the illustrations, but as a educational tool, you might find that it's actually better not to have the illustrations and just to tell the story. So what I like about this book is that it goes through the life of this wolf pup, or this, actually there are 2 of them or 3 of them. And it says, if you see, say a particular flower blooming, or this bird, or you see that you're going to go trick-or-treating, or that the butterfly, it says, if you see all these things, then look to the north, because up in the north, something else is happening. And what the other thing is that's happening is that this mother wolf has given birth to some pups, and it's going through their whole life. Well, not their whole life, but a big chunk of their life. And so you get to see them grow, and you get to also see the changes that are going on in the environment up there, and also potentially where you are, depending on where you are when you read this book. So I love that connection because it first gives you something to look about in your own environment, and then you can then imagine what's going on up in the north with this family of wolves. So I really liked that aspect of the book. I also liked it because it was a really engaging book. I didn't find that I was being just talked to with a bunch of information. I felt like I was being taken on a journey. And so each time I turned the page, I was interested, how old are the pups now? What's going on in their life? What does the environment look like? So overall, I really, really enjoyed this book. Highly recommend it. And I think that both of my children actually enjoyed it too. Sometimes they really didn't, and I'll try to point out those books. So Breathe, this is one of those books that is super gorgeous, but completely written for really, really young students, maybe even illustrated for really young students, or not even students, really young children. And so while I loved this book, I buy a lot of books, picture books, for the cover, for the illustrations. And I originally bought this for our ocean main lesson block. And of course it came in handy for here. as an afterthought. It came in handy when I was realizing, hey, I have a lot of other books that could coordinate really well with this. However, the writing is completely for, in my opinion, toddler level, preschool level. Even the story itself is more preschool level. The illustrations are really beautiful. So here's the thing. My daughter is 10. My son is 14. He's definitely not going to sit through a picture book like this. But before puberty, he might have. Not so much because he really wanted to listen to the story, just because it's enjoyable. But this story is really, really juvenile. So what I tried to do was add a little bit more content to the story so that it was a little bit more beefed up for my 10-year-old. Well, she wasn't having it at all. She said, no, read it the way that it is written, because that's what she wanted to hear. She didn't want to hear my version of the story. I thought that was funny and kind of curious. So we still added it in, but if I were doing this for the second time and I had a child who was 10, I would not necessarily spend money on this book. I might pick it out from the library, but I wouldn't feel like it was necessary for this unit for my children's ages. However, if you are doing this unit with really young children, then I think this is a golden book to have. So it's called Breathe by Scott Magoon. Sea Bear. This is another one that the illustrations are just gorgeous. This is by Lindsay Moore, and this is called A Journey for Survival, and it is so beautiful. I love the illustrations in this book. I also love the whole story. It really just takes you on this whole journey of this polar bear who's going in search of food and just the life. And you learn so much in the process, but it's done again in a really beautiful story format. And the illustrations are so, so gorgeous. Had we not already done an art project for this unit, granted, our unit was really small, I would have taken this book as art inspiration. And you still can. You can do as many art projects as you want. But we had already chosen, and I'll show you in a little bit, another book to do some art inspiration for a lesson. But this is one that I would love, love, love to explore, just if we had more time for the unit or just as the unit spills over into other lessons. I love all the colors. It's so beautiful. So this book also includes some information at the back of the book, and I love it when books do this. So you get this beautiful picture or story, storybook. You get this beautiful story, which is great for all ages. But then if you need more information or you choose to educate yourself as a teacher, parent who's going to read the book, then you can incorporate some of that information very authentically and organically through the story or afterwards. Sometimes, especially if we're reading biographies, we'll read the part after. Because again, my children are older. We'll just read it, even though it's a little bit drier. It usually is inspiring and of interest since we've already read the book and we're like, oh, what happened to that person? Or in this case, tell me more about the polar bear or, the Arctic or the region or the other animals that are included in the book. And so this has that for you, which means you don't have to go out and get other books. You could just use this one. So really beautiful, beautiful book. Mountains of the World. We didn't go through all of this book. We've actually used this book in the past for some of our other lessons. Again, art inspiration. But we did, this is beautiful. We did go to Mount Denali to read up on these sections, and then we also included the Northern Lights, and I think there was another section in here that we read as well. I think the mountain ranges. So we didn't go through this book cover to cover. We just pulled out the sections that were relevant for the lessons that we were doing. So again, really, really beautiful picture book. Yeah, gosh, picture book and storybooks, they're very similar, but they're two different things. So this has this really interesting illustration style that I've seen in other books by this author. Dieter Braun, I believe is the name. I may be probably mispronouncing that. So for me, it kind of looks like those computer animations that sometimes I really dislike, but in this case, I really, really love it. I also love the use of color on each of these pages where you see a general color theme that you see. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but there is something really soothing about the color choices, how they coordinate, and how each page has this unique set of colors that really matches the illustrations. So I'm really into color and just the way it makes you feel and your relationship to the images. And there's probably a huge science and art behind it that I don't know about, but I just can tell you that there are some books that use color in a way that's really satisfying to see. Okay, so this book, we only just read a few portions of it, so it was a pretty quick addition. Let's move on to this stack here. So we have Call of the Wild and White Fang. They're both by Jack London, and I had my 14-year-old son read these. And the thing is that I don't do a lot of assigned reading, but in this case, we did do assigned reading. Although the first time we read Call of the Wild, or it might have been White Fang, I can't remember, was about 12 years ago or so. I actually can't remember. It was a long time ago. And I was then assigning it to my oldest son at the time, who was maybe 11 or so. Gosh, I can't remember now. And he had just learned how to read proficiently. I know this is kind of a little bit of a backstory, but he had caught the reading bug, and he was reading things so quickly, just book after book after book. And so a lot of the things were probably grade level, but the content itself wasn't very rich. And so I offered him this book. Maybe it wasn't quite so long ago. Maybe he was 12 or 13. Anywho, the point is that I gave him this book, and he's like, oh yeah, I can read it like in 3 days. And it was one or the other, so it was half the size. I can't remember which one it was. And he maybe read like 2 sentences and just kept putting it down, not reading it. And I was just like, but you said you could read it in just a couple of days, and he wasn't reading it. So I read it aloud to all of my kids at the time. So I might have had a 12-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 4-year-old, and I might have been pregnant with my 4th. So here's the thing. If your student is not reading the book that you want them to read, you can read it aloud to them, or get the audiobook. I do enjoy reading aloud. It does take a lot of time, so an audiobook is a really great alternative. But the thing is that you have to be clear on the purpose of why you're assigning the book. Are you assigning the book because you want them to read it? Are you assigning the book because you want them to get the content? Are you assigning the book because you need to for another assignment, like they need to write an essay, for instance? If you're clear on the why behind you assigning the book, then you can choose a method that's going to be suitable for them. So in this case, my son, this is years ago, was not reading the book, but I found it to be of tremendous value, so I read it aloud. So my takeaway from this book, just from a purely do I enjoy it, do I not enjoy it, I just found Call of the Wild and White Fang both really boring. Okay, and I know that's a horrible way to describe a book, but I just found them really boring. But I still found tremendous value in them, and the value that I found was actually in the use of vocabulary. I found the vocabulary to be really, really rich, and I found that on every page I needed to highlight a word that I wasn't familiar with. So I found the vocabulary to be really rich, and that was the reason why I was more insistent on including it in our lessons, because I thought that the book itself was really good. The other thing, from the vocabulary perspective, the other thing is that we're so used to books just being really engaging from an adventure kind of way, or it has a really great plot and the characters are really intriguing. This book you had to struggle to really connect with it. And maybe I just had to really struggle to connect with it, or my students had to really struggle to connect with it. But when you go through the work, you come out on the other side with a connection that maybe you wouldn't have with another book that was easy to read. So for those reasons, I do like to include books that are a little bit more challenging. Maybe you consider them classics or not. I have some opinions about that. But we went ahead and we included this. Now, my son had read this year for English, and he wrote an essay on it. So it happened to coordinate really well with our Alaska unit for that reason. So I didn't have him read it again in the week that we did this unit, but I did want to include it here that if you do have an older student who is participating in this unit, this might be a good opportunity to include some of these classics that are going to provide more than just what my picture books would typically provide for a younger student. Okay, and then he did mark on with post-it flags. He marked different sections where he had to pull content from the book in order to cite it in an essay that he wrote. So he is in 9th grade. He is 14. And so this book I feel is just appropriate for junior high or high school. And that's why I'm sharing it with you. So you're going to see things that are all over the map from preschool to all the way up until high school with this unit. So let me just take a moment to share the other novel, and actually I'm going to share all 3 of the more novel-like books that I actually read aloud. So we had Born to Mush, the story of Dallas Seavey. This is a biography. We also had Sweet Home Alaska. And this book, my son wasn't really interested in reading with us, so I read this one to my 10-year-old daughter. This book was one that we read together. I read it aloud to both of them. And this was an awesome book. I loved it so much. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I'm not really into sports, and I don't follow sports. I don't watch sports. And so what this book provided for me, which I imagine would be like if you are watching a sporting event, is the thrill of competition, the work required for sports, what do you call this? I think what it takes to be an athlete. So the mannerisms, I suppose, of an athlete, the dedication of an athlete, and then taking you through the actual race. So it takes you through a couple of races. This is for dog mushing. This is dog sledding. And it talks about primarily the Iditarod, which is a race that's done in Alaska. It's 1,000 miles, and it usually takes anywhere from, I think the shortest run was maybe 8 days and several hours. So I think typically it's about 9 days, maybe 10 days. And I guess it could go all the way up into, 2 weeks, maybe even more. So it takes you through this person's journey to the competition and then through the competition. And it is like, it's a page turner. It is thrilling. It has like all the makings of like a really great action movie or thriller movie or just a great movie. I loved it so much. And I think the reason why I loved it so much is that kind of like you're rooting for the guy to finish, and you're anticipating all these different things that are happening, and you're curious how it's going to turn out. I mean, there's like life or death situations in this book. Anyway, we liked it so much. We read this book in 4 days, so we really hustled through it. So once we were done with this and we recognized that our unit was going to spill over into the following week, we added another book. So I'm going to put this one aside, even though this was part of the books that we read or that I shared with you to begin with. I reviewed that one. Awesome book. Definitely look into it. So we added another book, another read aloud, in addition to all the other read alouds. And this one is Ice Whale. So it's also by the author who did My Side of the Mountain, which is a book that my boys love, love, love. I highly recommend that book as well. And so we started reading this book now. My 14-year-old son has already read this book, and so I'm reading it aloud again to both of them, my 10-year-old and my 14-year-old. Now, we've only just started this book, so I can't speak about the whole book. So far, we really enjoy it. It's about an Inuit boy who gives away the location of whales to some whalers, some Yankees, and what he needs to do to rectify what he did. And so far I like it, but I will be able to tell you more about it on the blog post that accompanies this video. That link is down in the description box below. So for the books that we didn't quite finish because we included them later, you can find more details about them on the website blog post. Okay, so we're including this one because we had it. My son has already read it, and because it's by an author who I really love the other books that she's done. Okay, so Sweet Home Alaska, I'll tell you briefly about this one. This is the other one that we did as a read aloud. We're nearly done with it in the sense that we are reading a lot every night. This has become somewhat of a bedtime story because we're doing our other content during the day. I really enjoy this book. My daughter loves it. She asked me to get the audiobook as well. So the reason why I really am enjoying this book is in part because, so this is set in the 1930s, I believe, and it's about Alaska still as a territory and about the Palmer Colony. And what I'm enjoying is all of these references to locations in Alaska, which are real, are places that I recently visited when I went to go visit my sister, who recently moved to a town that's about an hour away from where this story takes place in Palmer, Alaska. And some of the other facts in this book are things that I recently learned about, and that brought a connection for me personally, and is bringing a connection for my daughter because now my sister lives up there. So I am enjoying this book. I love the historical references, and the story right now is really charming. So can't 100% recommend it yet since we're not done with it, but still we're really, really enjoying it. Now, I bought this book, over 2 years ago, I want to say, and we started reading it then and probably only did about 2 or 3 chapters, never finished it. So I was really happy that it was still in our library and that we can actually tackle it this time around and that we're enjoying it so much. Okay, let's go back to the books that I added more recently. North Country Night. This is a storybook about night in the Arctic Circle and the animals and what they do and how they find their food and all about the temperatures. And I love the way that it is illustrated where you really feel like it's a cold night. Now, both of my children enjoyed this book, but because it came towards the end of our whole unit, we get a little bit of, I guess, educational fatigue, information overload, fatigue from the repetition. So because I pulled out all the books that I had on Arctic animals and the tundra, by the time we got to this book, we were just a little bit kind of done. If you're putting this at the start of your unit, I think you'll probably enjoy even more than the way we enjoyed it towards the end. So beautiful book, and happy to have included it. This one is called Bears by Scholastic, and I don't even know if this book is still available. I think it was published in the 90s. But what I really like, and I bought this, I think, at a bookstore, like a secondhand bookstore, library bookstore, for like 25 cents. So, and a lot of times when I'm searching in, for those really great values at the library bookstore, for instance, which they have like a sale twice a year where everything's just like 4 for $1, and I stock up at that time. And we may not use those books right away. In fact, often we don't, but I'm looking for things that I know will be included in our units, either past units or future units. So I'm looking for nonfiction books. I'm looking for picture books. And on occasion, I'm looking for novels that can coordinate, or classics that can coordinate with some of my units that I'm anticipating that I'm going to have. So this book called Bears, we bought this book years ago, and it's only now making its way into one of our units. And we really only just needed the parts on the polar bears, and I think maybe the grizzly bear, but it was such a quick, easy read that we read the whole book. What's really cool is that it has these acetate pages in between, and I kind of liked that interactive feature. Also the pages, and I don't know if you'll be able to find this book, but if you do find one of the original copies, and the pages are still printed this way, it's made it feels like it's laminated or some kind of other paper, which means that if you've got little children, this is a great book to have. I feel like they're less likely to damage the pages, and also it's spiral bound, which you don't see it on the outside, but it also makes it really easy for the book just to lay flat open and not close on its own. So really enjoyed this book, really cute and charming, very quick, gives you a nice little overview of bears, and then at the very end it actually tells you about animals that are bears but scientists say are not bears, like the panda, which I don't know what kind of animal it is if it's not a bear. Something new to learn. And then some other bears that are quite unique, ones that I didn't know about. And I do believe, bit of trivia, the aardvark is part of the bear family. So that's kind of curious. And that's the aardvark, I believe, is the animal that is native to where we live, but they aren't here anymore. I think so. I got to check on that, but that would be something that I would then bring to the children if we were continuing this unit. I might bring something that was a little bit more native to our area, and I think the grizzly bear no longer exists in California. It's extinct or it's been, the last one I think was hunted down in early last century. So anyway, you can always bring in little tidbits of information that can relate to where you are particularly living, even if you're studying something that's from another area. Okay, Ice Bear and Little Fox. This is a really charming story about a polar bear and his little, I'm going to call him his little shadow or sidekick, which is the wolf who accompanies the polar bear because he's going to eat all the leftovers as he hunts for food. And so I liked this book. It takes you, I think, through the entire year, and it's also really beautifully illustrated, and it's another one where you get to learn a lot of information as you're reading this story without feeling like you're reading a nonfiction book. So I really, really appreciate that about story books and picture books, where you're learning a lot about whatever information it is, but you're getting it in a really beautiful story. And it also uses for some of the animals, it uses the native Inuit names for them. And so that's kind of nice to see, because we had that repeated in some of the books. And so my daughter was kind of perked up when she's like, oh, that word was familiar. So I appreciated that it did that in this book. Over in the Arctic, my daughter loved this book so much. We read it multiple times. This is a really kind of sing-song, versy, melodious kind of book. Those are probably all the wrong words to describe the rhyming nature of this book. And I didn't know, but when my mom came to visit, she said, oh, this is based on another poem, which I didn't know about, or another verse that I didn't know about. But this is a really fun it's a fun book to read, so much fun. So, over in the Arctic where the cold waters run, lived a mother polar bear and her little cub one. Roll, said the mother, I roll, said the one. So they rolled on the ice where the cold water runs. So you can see it's kind of like a sing-song way to say it. So then you get those illustrations. Then, you have number 2 and number 3, and it's all written in the same way, but it's really, really fun to read. I don't know if you've ever encountered books where it just is hard to read. It's not pleasurable to read out loud. This is one that's like super pleasurable to read out loud. So once you get done with the book, then you can go and do the whole book again, but this time you can find the hidden animals that are on each page. And so that made it super engaging because you read it once and you see the main animal, you enjoy reading the story, then you can read it again sometime later, and then you're kind of searching for those little animals that are kind of hidden on the page. So really highly recommend this book. Really loved it. The Polar Bear, Master of the Ice. This is another book that I picked up from the library bookstore. It's even inscribed with the grandmother who gave it to the child. So at first I was thinking, this is going to be kind of like a boring book. And I love books that have illustrations over photographs, but I think it's really important to include some books with photographs if you're doing something that's nonfiction. And it turned out that I loved this book. It was written so well. It's really engaging. I loved all of the actual pictures because it's different from all the illustrations that we have. This was somewhat of a page turner. Like, I really, really enjoyed the content. And this was one of the last books that we read for this unit. So I was surprised at how much we all enjoyed it, considering we'd already read so many books about polar bears. But I really liked it. Now, this is an older book, and so I don't even know if it's still available. But you don't really need to buy the exact same books that I'm sharing. But it's more about, we're getting a book like this and a book like that and a picture book and a nonfiction book and a book about, native tales. All these books kind of round out how we put together our unit. But I do happen to really like this one. So it's an older book. Hopefully you can find it if you like it. I have so much to say about this next book. I'm really excited to share it because it's the One Small Square and it's the Arctic Tundra. Now, I have a thing for the tundra. I don't know why the Arctic Tundra. I'm really curious and intrigued by the tundra. I love it so much. Okay, let's just put that aside because that's maybe why I like this book. Now, we have One Small Square books I think we have this entire series. So I'll have like ocean and pond and river, and I'm probably missing like a ton of the titles. But we have used these in our spring nature units for years. And every time I read them, we don't like them. And I am so sad because these books are so gorgeous. The illustrations are beautiful. The content is just right. It even offers some like science projects or activities that you can do. Like as a book, it's just perfect. And I'm curious, like why are we just not enjoying these books? So here's my reflection on this. I think that one of the reasons why, and I'd have to test this theory out, that we haven't enjoyed these in the past and why we enjoy it so much now is the season that we're doing them in. Right now, we're doing this in the winter where we are typically doing a lot more reading. In the spring and the summer, we're doing a lot more hands-on activities. And so if we're doing our reading for a spring unit, which is going to be something that's more hands-on, we don't tend to be as engaged with it as when we're doing it other times of year, is my reflection on this. So I loved this book. It was great. My daughter, on the other hand, didn't like it. And so I was really kind of just saddened by the fact that she didn't care for it. Granted, by the time we got to this book, it was towards the end of our unit, or, the last few days of our unit. We went through it pretty quickly. She just didn't seem as interested in it as I was, and my 14-year-old son listened to the whole book as I read it aloud, and he seemed to enjoy it, maybe just to say something different from his sister, I don't know, or maybe he really truly did enjoy it, but I really, really, really enjoyed it, and it could be because I really like the Arctic Tundra, it could be because we're reading this in the winter versus the spring, or it also could just be a really awesome book, so highly recommend this one, but also bear in mind that my daughter didn't care for it. This moose belongs to me. This barely relates to this location, except it's about a moose, and moose are in Alaska, so we included it because I already had it. So this is a charming, so adorable book about a boy who finds a moose. And by the way, moose are very dangerous animals, so, just bear that in mind, because when we went and we saw one, you could get hurt, you could get killed, so you have to be super careful. But anyway, total fiction, beautiful picture book. This boy finds a moose. It's his pet, and he knows it's his pet. He knows it belongs to him because he follows all of these rules, and it's so adorable and charming until the boy's out with the moose and someone else calls the moose and like, oh, you've come back to me. And the boy's like, that's not your pet. He's my pet. But then the moose goes to this other person and he's just like, oh, what happened? Anyway, it's a super charming, adorable book. And I actually really like the illustrations. They're really different and unique. They look like they're oil paintings, but then it looks like sketches. And then you have like the sketches over the oil painting. And it's just really different and interesting, and I really liked the story. It was really charming and just kind of fun. Okay, so that's those are the books I believe that that I didn't share before. Okay, so let me share with you the projects. Yes, 2 of the projects. Let me share 2 of the projects. So we went ahead and we did our Panning for Gold project because we bought these for our California history unit, and once we started doing our Alaska unit, I felt like we could use these and add a few more things. So we did our Panning for Gold. This kit is how to learn how to pan for gold, and it comes with the bowl and then the sand that has the pyrite in it so that you can pan for gold. This was a great kit. Really, really liked it and intend to use it again many times now that you have all the materials, and we have some extra pyrite that we can just break up and then scatter in a little creek locally and actually try to do it a little bit more authentically. Well, just for the experience. We also have a Golden Nugget Dig Kit. We haven't done this one yet. We do a ton of dig kits, and this is one where I believe you go through what looks like a block of gold or a bar of gold, which is really cool, and then you can find your pyrite kind of in it. So we haven't done this one yet, but I think this would coordinate really well with an Alaska unit or a California unit. So in doing so, we ended up adding 2 more books to our unit. One of them is called Call of the Klondike, A True Gold Rush Adventure, and this is one that I will either read aloud or assign to my 14-year-old. And the other one is called The Bite of the Gold Bug, A Story of the Alaskan Gold Rush, and that one is a little bit more appropriate for elementary, middle, or young elementary. And so again, 2 more books that we ended up tacking onto this unit to kind of complement some of the projects that we were doing, because once we get started, we, as always, tend to just get really immersed in it. At least I do. So these 2 projects I think would go really well with this unit if you wanted some hands-on stuff. So I'm pulling out this book for a minute because as we were reading through this, we got to a part that talked about animal tracks and the difference in the animal tracks, versus, like, say, if you just went out to walk on mud or snow versus if you had snow shoes, I suppose, you could just kind of experience the difference in sinking in or not sinking in. And so this had this little section here about the sinking feeling of these different animal prints. And I pulled out our Nature Watch project or kit, and this is all on animal tracks. So it comes with the animal tracks here, and then if you could just go out to like a muddy area and actually make your own prints if you wanted to. You could also do this with I guess clay or maybe even plaster of Paris if you wanted to make your own casts and molds. I can't remember which one is which. And it also comes with, I think this is a card game to identify the different prints, the Peterson guide for different prints, and then this one on animal tracks. So I went ahead and just pulled this out so that we could have something to do and refer to as we were reading this book. So if you were looking to include this, I wanted to offer this as a really great hands-on project if you decide that you want to take this unit in that direction, or if you just wanted to study animal tracks, this might be a really nice kit for you. It's from Nature Watch. I really love the kits from Nature Watch. I find them to be really well done and very engaging, and we really enjoyed them over the years. So before I share with you the books that you've already seen that I'm going to review for you, I want to share with you the projects that we did. So my son had previously finished his hat, or actually I take it back, I think he finished it while we were doing this unit. He did just such a beautiful job. I love all of the colors. And so since we had already done our hats and we have really gotten into them and done a lot now, we have some tutorials. So you can check the description box below, and there's a tutorial on the hat, and there's also a tutorial on the scarf as well. So because we had done a lot of hats, we decided to go ahead and do a scarf, which actually is really easy, just a little bit tedious. And so we used 1 skein of yarn to do this, and it ended up being about 44 inches. So I wish it was a little bit longer. So if you're following the tutorial, I might make it either buy 2 skeins of yarn or make your width a little bit smaller. And then we added a fringe on the end, and I chose a color that could coordinate with my son's hat that he already knit. And so I started the project, I cast it on, and I knit maybe 2 rows, and then he knit probably about 35 to 40 inches and I probably knit about 4 to 8 inches, and then I did the last section and I binded off, and then I added the fringe as well. So it was somewhat of a group project because I helped him with it and we did it together. But what we would do is that while I was reading the books and the storybooks, he would be knitting until he got tired, and then sometimes we would trade and I would knit and he would read. So these are 2 projects that you could add to this unit if you wanted to or lived in cold weather. I'll share with you some of the other projects that we did in a minute. But first, actually, let me share with you these 2 books really quickly because we didn't go through these whole books. This is another one by Dieter Braun. I might be pronouncing his name wrong. I apologize. Wild Animals of the North. Another one with spectacular illustrations. Not a lot of content, though. So some of these ones just have the name of the animals without any content. So we just went through this book and we found animals that related to the North or the Arctic and read those sections, and then also just looked at some of the illustrations that didn't include any content but still had animals that were from the North. So there was a section here, can't seem to find it right now, but there were a few animals that we read. So this would be a book that if you already had, you could totally include it, but I wouldn't include it specifically for this unit just because we only used a few sections from it. Okay, let me put this aside. I've run out of space. Let's put this down here. Okay, the next book that we also had that was easy to include was National Parks of the USA. We only read one, or actually two, that related to the North. We read, did we read Glacier Bay? Yeah, I think we read Glacier Bay and Denali. I think those were the two that we read. Oh no, we read three. There was one, I think, in Montana as well, if I'm not mistaken. So we just read these sections. It was really great to have read these sections and then seen the same information reflected in some of the other books that we had. So a little bit of repetition is wonderful when you're doing a unit study like this. Too much of it becomes like just dead. It weighs down the entire unit and it really sours the whole unit. So a little bit of repetition is kind of fun. The kids get to, in the moment review and recall some of the information they learned previously, and maybe you can make it exciting by even quizzing the children if you wanted to. But once it gets to the point of like, I've read 3 books that are on the polar bear, I'm getting kind of tired, then you've just kind of inverted the whole experience of repetition. So we had this one, therefore we included it, but again, not one that I would say definitely run out and get it if you want to do one on the North, but we did, or Alaska, Arctic Circle, but we did pull the parts that were relevant. Okay, moving on to this stack of books right here. We have a search for the Northern Lights. Actually, let me do this like this. So at first I didn't really care for the illustrations in this book, but actually they really grew on me, especially the ones of the trees and this beautiful Northern Lights image, and this ended up being the inspiration for our chalk drawing for this unit. What was really cool about this book, which was kind of unexpected, is the story itself is really well done. It's about a mother and a daughter, and they learn about the Northern Lights, and the mom happens to be going to Alaska for a business meeting, or for business, and the daughter ends up using like all of her money, all of her allowance to travel with the mom so they can go see the Northern Lights. And anyway, they don't see them, which was like a really cool thing to have in a book, where it's like you're anticipating that they're gonna go have this amazing vacation, see the Northern Lights, but they don't. They come back home and it's kind of a bummer. Well, it's not a bummer. The mom does pre-warn the daughter, like, we might not see them, So then they go home and then they look for another place where they could see the Northern Lights, and she goes online and she signs up for like this app that, Aurora Tracker or something like that. And then they end up going somewhere closer to home to go see it. So I really, really like the story, because even though it's a picture book, it reads a little bit more like a chapter book. And the illustrations of like the Northern Lights and the trees and everything really grew on me. And it's a different kind of book than all the other books that I have. So I really, really enjoyed including it in our unit. Let me put these over here and move on to Arctic White. This is another book about kind of, I guess, in search of the Northern Lights, but you don't expect it. So you're going through this book. It's mostly about the color of the Arctic, and it's really beautiful. I love the illustrations. I even love the story, and it's just kind of like these monochromatic colors of white, gray, blue, purple, and even the animals, that color. And then you keep going, and it's dark, and you keep going, and I'm just gonna, and then, you're reading it like this, and the spoiler alert, because for me, like, we came upon this following page, and it was like, wow, like, it took your breath away. So you're reading, it's all, dark and kind of black and blue, and all of a sudden, bam, you see all this color, and it's like, it's so beautiful. It's the Northern Lights. And so I loved that aspect of this book. So simple in its story, and yet so profound at the same time. So really, really enjoyed this book quite a bit. The Peregrine's Journey. This was a really great book. Doesn't just take you from, the part that we were studying, it takes you through the entire journey of this bird from the north to the south. And then I can't remember if it takes you back up again, but it was so well done. You learned so much in the process, and you really felt, in my opinion, connected to the journey of this bird through all the different locations the bird went through the difficulties of the journey, and to finding the destination, and everything along the way. Really, really enjoyed it. Really beautiful illustrations. A little bit different than just studying the north, but I think it's important to include a book like this because a lot of animals that are in the north do migrate, and you're wondering what happens in the winter. Where are they? And now you get to know, at least for the Peregrine, where it's going. And then at the back, it gives a little bit more information, which is really nice. And I did like the illustrations. The Polar Bear's Son, an Inuit Tale. So this one has some parts that are a little bit sad, and I'm really curious about the original story. So it's about a woman who takes care of or rescues a baby polar bear. How does she find it? I think she just finds it because the mother has been killed. Okay, so she brings it back to her village and she raises it. She doesn't have much food, but whatever she does have, she shares with the polar bear. And now it's gotten bigger, and now the polar bear can hunt for her. And so now she has so much food. She's sharing it with everyone. People get jealous, and they decide to kill the polar bear. And this is the part that I'm curious about, whether, it just doesn't seem in line with what I would imagine the Inuit people or the village life or the tribal life to do. It doesn't at first seem connected. But the reason behind them wanting to kill the polar bear is because it's only going to get bigger and it will get dangerous. It's a wild animal, so therefore we can't have it in the village. So they're going to kill the polar bear. So the woman sends the polar bear off. You need to go or your life is in danger. So the polar bear leaves, and then she will on occasion go out on the ice and call for her son, the polar bear, and the son will come to her and they are reunited. So really nice story, nicely illustrated, and I like including the local indigenous tales, folk tales, fairy tales, legends, mythology, depending on where in the world and what time period. I like including those stories into our unit studies. A is for Musk Ox. My mom got me this book. We love it. It is hilarious. It is so much fun to read. However, I don't like reading it because it is really hard for me to say musk ox or musk oxen. There's just something about the letters that just don't work well with my mouth, and so I always struggle. It just gives me a headache to read this book, only because it's so hard for me to read musk ox. There you go. I'm even having trouble with it right now. But the story itself is so adorable. So if you don't struggle saying musk ox, then go ahead and pick up this book because it's super charming and you'll really love it. So not really about the North in the way that you would expect. You're thinking it's just a book about the alphabet, but actually you learn so much about the musk ox through this book. So really great addition. Another book about musk ox. This is by Jan Brett, and this is a really adorable book about a musk ox who is now becoming shelter for all these other animals of the north as the winter progresses, and they are all cold and they are seeking shelter. And it's really lovely. It's written in a really lovely way because the musk ox is telling the different animals, because some of them are predators of one another, we're gonna be nice, we're gonna eat. Well, she doesn't say it that way. That's actually exactly not the way she says it. But the musk ox, I think it's a girl. It could be a boy. I actually don't remember. Tells the house rules, and so the voices have to be quiet and gentle thumping and claws to yourself and no biting and no pouncing. And it's just a really cute way to say, hey, we're all going to be together. I know you're not always friendly with one another, so while you're in my care, here are the house rules. And I love that approach. It's super adorable, and the colors, the illustrations, the story. I really love this book. So another great addition. Storm Run, the story of the first woman to win the Iditarod race. This book was awesome. Now, it's a picture book, but it's more of a chapter book. So don't be deceived by this book thinking, oh, you're getting this really quick, 10-minute story. This probably could have also been packaged as an actual thicker chapter book. Okay, so I would put this more like middle to upper elementary, even though the illustrations and the way it's presented make it look like a really young picture book. This book was awesome. I loved it. It was a long picture book to read. It was a page turner. We kept trying to find out like what's happening next, what's happening, what's gonna happen. It encouraged us to go online and then learn about this is the story of Lily Riddles. We also have another one on Susan Butcher. So it encouraged us just to go online, learn more about her, just learn more about dog sledding in general and the Iditarod. Really, really, really loved this book. Highly recommend it for, just female athletes, the Iditarod, Alaska, dog sledding. It fits so many different categories. So really enjoyed it. So Storm Run, the story of the first woman to win the Iditarod dog sled race. This is by Libby Riddles. I apologize. And she's also written other books too as well. Deer, Moose, Elk, and Caribou. This is another book that I picked up from the library bookstore for like $1. It's also inscribed for another person. Anyway, and I love books like that. I love when books travel from family to family and people leave notes. It delights me. Anyway, I really, really love this book. I learned a lot. It was really simple and well done and yet really informative, but not in a really heavy nonfiction, I'm going to pour out a bunch of information kind of book. So highly recommend this book if you are looking to learn more about deer, which I believe it's moose, elk, and caribou are part of the deer family. And then there's also deer. I'm learning a lot, and I might be wrong, but I'm learning a lot while we're reading all of these books. So another book that I highly recommend. Whale Snow. This is not an Inuit. Let me get this right. An Inupiat story. So the northernmost portion of Alaska is where this tribe is from. So this is the story about a whale snow, which is the kind of snow that comes when they hunt a whale. And then there's other aspects of the whale, the spirit of the whale. So the child who is in this book, he was born when they had whale snow, which was the snow that came with the whale. So this whale feels kind of special to him. Anyway, it takes you through getting the whale, and then when they cook it and everyone's coming to eat, and then you learn a little bit about the customs, the tribal customs, and also the spiritual I don't know if you call them spiritual customs, spiritualness of the tribe, and about the spirit of the animal. And my understanding is that animals, they give themselves to the people when you kill them to nourish yourself. And there is something really special and honoring about that. And then the whale spirit goes back into the world and then comes back another time as another whale, is their belief system. So I enjoy including those things into our lessons because you really get to learn about other people that way, their beliefs and their practices. Upon Denali, this was a beautiful book. Highly recommend this book. Learned so much. It was really engaging. And I want to share with you a little bit about this book that works really well for multiple ages. The first thing is that you get this little caption here that would be great to read for a really young child. And then if you have an older child with that young child, you might read this part, and then you'll read, the other portion that goes along with it. And then if you're still more curious, there's even more stuff along the edges of the book where you can learn more information. So books like this sometimes get a little bit confusing for me because I'm like, which part do we read first? And then what do we read next? But I felt like it flowed really easily compared to some other books where you're reading a caption that actually is part of the content. And if you read them out of order, then you get confused. Not so much with this book. So really, really liked this book. Learned so much about Denali, the geology of the area, the history of the area as well, from the local tribes, sorry, and some of the names given for both the animals and the mountains, and then a little bit of like, prehistoric history, and then into the animals that live there now, and the plants, and the whole, looking at it from a whole entire year, what's in bloom and how long the seasons are. Overall, just so informative. My sister-in-law actually got this book first, and I saw her with it when we went up to Alaska, and I'm like, oh, I really want to add that into our unit, and I'm so glad that we did. Really, really enjoyed it. Okay, 2 books that I want to share with you here, Raven and the Tide Lady and How Devil's Club Came to Be. These are really beautifully illustrated storybooks about native tales about how the tide came to be, and this one about how Devil's Club came to be, which is a medicinal plant. And these books are so gorgeous, so beautifully illustrated, and they were the art inspiration for a lesson that I did with my daughter. We used pastels, and then eventually we used chalk pastels in order to do this art project, and it was based on Raven and the Tide Lady, and we were inspired by one of the images here. We decided to turn it into a lesson, and so I want to speak about that just for a moment. Here is the image. And what we did was she did one side of the page and I did the other side of the page, so that when you put them together, it looks like the page in the book, sort of. Okay, so, and then I sprayed this with a fixative so that it wouldn't transfer on to other things and we wouldn't ruin it. So when we're doing art projects like this, one of the reasons why I like to include them is for us to take a moment to slow down and to process what we've learned and to reflect on it, and not in a this is what we're doing right now kind of way, in a natural way that happens organically when we do stop to do some art. And so what happens is we're reading so much. We're reading books every day. And at some point it can just be information overload, or just the fact that we read, we're consuming, and even if it's not new information, just going through. And we're doing a lot of speaking, and my children are doing a lot of listening, and we need a moment just to stop and slow down. So if you watch the lesson that I have on this, it's a very quiet experience. We're both just concentrating on our art, and it gives us both an opportunity just to rest our listening, rest our vocals, rest our mind, and just let that information that we've learned kind of seep in and digest and be reflected in art form. And hopefully this is a connection to a lesson that can then be the connection for a whole unit. So when we're thinking back, this might be the thing that kind of binds her to that unit, or is the anchor for the unit that inspires her to remember some of the other things that we did. And plus, we just love doing our art. It's a really beautiful meditative process, in my opinion. It doesn't have to be stressful. You could just, put colors on the page without it being anything. You could just be inspired by some of the books and just do blues and purples and just imagine that's the sky up in the north. So that's one of the reasons why we'll do a lot of this art. It doesn't seem to hold a lot of educational value by itself, but I do believe that it's part of helping the rest of the unit take hold in the child's mind. Okay, so the next few books I want to share with you, this one actually inspired a couple other projects. This is called The Story of Snow. This is another one that my sister-in-law had that I decided to add to our unit. And my children didn't really care for the content in this book, but it did inspire 2 projects that I want to share with you. I found this content really informative. I learned so much about snow and snowflakes that I didn't know before. And even more so because we ended up doing our trivia cards based on this book. So we've done these in the past with some of our other units. We have them for birds, and we have them for bees and ocean and whales and sea turtles and astronomy. So we went ahead and we did this again for this unit. So we did this one is my set, but we did our illustrations on the front, and then on the back we have, oops, I actually didn't finish them all. We did our questions. So we have our questions. It's a bit of a trivia, and then it kind of coordinates with the front. So this time around, I actually did them, printed them out, laminated them, and also added the questions on the back typed up. So if you are interested, you can purchase these on my website. That link is down in the description box below. If you want to include these in your unit and you don't have the time to do, don't have the time to do your own illustrations, then you can get these and print them off, cut them up, laminate them, or you don't have to laminate them. And then that way you can include these in your unit if you'd like. So I like the originals because I really like doing my own art, but if you wanted something that was pre-done for you, this might be a really good idea. So the illustrations and the content are inspired by this book. So if you read this book, then you should be able to answer the questions on the trivia cards, hopefully. They were a little bit challenging, but I hope that you enjoy them too if you end up buying that set. And we enjoyed it. We learned a lot. And this also inspired another project. We did what looked like metallic snowflakes. So we used this is like semi-transparent origami paper or kite paper, and you can get this from A Child's Dream. And I used some of our Adirondack metallic inks to give it kind of like a nice shimmer, just to do something a little bit different from our typical snowflakes. However, I don't believe we'd ever done snowflakes before as part of one of our lessons, and my children loved it. So again, there's a tutorial on how to make these as well if you want to include that. Okay, next book, just two more. Granite, Iditarod Champion. This is a story about Susan Butcher, and this is a really nice, another nice story about the Iditarod and, you know, what it means to be involved in it, and the dogs and the dog musher. This is a shorter picture book. I do not care for the illustrations at all, but the story itself is really fantastic. And then it also, again, encouraged us to look up Susan Butcher and find out more about her. And there is, at the hospital in Anchorage, there is a wing to the hospital that's dedicated to her or funded by her, I'm not sure, the Susan Butcher Family Center. And her dog, Granite, stands in front of the center, and it is dedicated to providing support and comfort to children who have parents or loved ones with cancer. So this actually is really close to my heart since my sister is up in Alaska now. She's recently moved there and she has brain cancer. And so, and part of her treatment was actually in Anchorage. So she probably was in this center, or at least her son can benefit from some of the services provided there. So that's a bit of another connection and to that story, and makes me more fond of Susan Butcher and her whole life. She, I believe, passed away from cancer. I don't remember the date. And so that's a little bit about her life. So again, really nice story. I like the story, but I like some of the other stories more on the Iditarod, but this is kind of close to my heart because of Susan Butcher's life. And the last book is called The Woman Who Married the Bear. So there are a few books, this one as well as these two, that are at, I believe it's called SeaAlaskaHeritage.org, possibly. That website has a lot of native stories as well as other things that are part of Alaska Heritage, and these three books can be found there. Otherwise, I think they're really hard to find otherwise. And I bought these three books up in Alaska at some of the local gift shops because I anticipated them being a little bit challenging to find, and so it's good that I bought them there. So this one is about a woman who marries a bear. And I didn't really care for the story or the illustrations that much, but I wanted to share it with you anyway because I did buy it intentionally to include other native stories of how, just the stories of how things came to be or their beliefs. That's something that's important to me to add into our unit, so that's why I did add this book into it. But I didn't really care for it. I don't think I cared for the way the story was presented from, you know, the grandfather telling the story to the two children, and he was a little bit harsh with the children in one part of the story, and that just, I didn't like that. But I know that it has to do with the story, like it was part of the whole story. And then also, yeah, it was okay. I didn't care for it as much as some of the other stories that we read, and as well as the illustrations. So if you were debating between, say, this book and say these two books, then I really liked how Devil's Club came to be between the three of them, followed by Raven and the Tide Lady. So if you had to choose a book that talked about, the local tribes, then I would go for How Devil's Club Came to Be as my first choice. Okay, I believe that is it. So thank you so much for watching this review video. Don't forget to check out the blog post that accompanies this video for more information, as well as the books that we use for this unit. You can find that link down in the description box below. You can also check out some of the other tutorials and videos for this unit study. You can tap on the screen right now to check out that playlist. And if you want to see how we're homeschooling on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.